The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the pool as laughter and music echoed through the backyard. Our family and friends were gathered for the annual summer party, one of those gatherings everyone expected to be a celebration of fun and lightheartedness. I should have felt happy. I should have felt at ease. But the truth was, as I walked around greeting guests, serving drinks, and checking on the kids, there was an unsettling feeling in my stomach. I glanced over at Mark, who was lounging at the edge of the pool with a beer in hand, chatting with our neighbor Greg. He looked tired. I hadn't noticed before how his face seemed to have lost some of its color, how his shirt clung a little too tightly to his stomach. His gut had expanded over the last few years, but I told myself I wasn't shallow. Still, every time I looked at him, the disappointment gnawed at me. It was like the man I had once been so in love with had disappeared, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. I hated myself for even thinking it, but I couldn't help it. I had tried to push these feelings aside, telling myself to focus on the positives. But in the heat of the moment, with all the friends and family around, those feelings came rushing back like a tidal wave. There was Jessica, laughing with the girls by the poolside, her perfectly toned body in a bikini. She caught my eye and gave me a cheerful wave. I waved back, forcing a smile. Jessica had the perfect life, perfect body, perfect husband, perfect children. In a way, she was everything I wasn't. And deep down, I hated her for it. I caught myself eyeing Mark again as he laughed with Greg, his face flushed from the sun and the beer. His once fit body, the one I fell in love with years ago, now looked awkward, even grotesque. The thought hit me like a slap across the face. He was overweight, unattractive, and I couldn't help but feel embarrassed. I pushed the thought away again. I didn't want to be this person. I didn't want to be the one to look at her husband and feel repulsed. But I was. And I couldn't deny it. I shook my head, trying to clear the negativity. I had to be better than this. But the feeling lingered, and as much as I tried to ignore it, it grew louder. The frustration inside me started to build. It wasn't just his appearance, it was everything. His lack of ambition, his long hours in front of the TV, his disinterest in the things that mattered to me. The more I thought about it, the more my resentment simmered. As the evening wore on, I joined a conversation with a few other guests near the pool, trying to distract myself. But my mind kept drifting back to Mark. He was standing now, trying to tell a joke to some of the men, but it wasn't landing. He wasn't funny anymore. He wasn't the man I remembered. The man I fell in love with had confidence, he had fire. This man seemed lost. I could feel my heart racing as I stewed in my thoughts, unable to escape the constant buzz of frustration. My eyes found Jessica again, who looked like she was living her best life, and I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of resentment. "You're looking at Mark again," came a voice behind me, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. It was Karen, one of my old friends, who had been watching me for a while. She was known for being blunt. I forced a smile and shrugged, but I knew she could tell something was off. "Everything okay?" Karen asked, her gaze narrowing. "Yeah, just tired," I lied. "It's been a long day." But it wasn't just the day that had worn me down, it was everything. The years of trying to make this marriage work when it felt like we were both just going through the motions. The weight of our unspoken issues, the things we both pretended weren't there, but they were. As the evening dragged on, the alcohol began to take the edge off my thoughts. I found myself laughing and chatting with friends, trying to pretend that everything was fine. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the bitterness inside me. I needed to vent. I needed to get it out. The opportunity presented itself when Mark joined the group by the pool again. He was still holding that same beer, a slight slur in his speech now, but it didn't matter. He was still that man, the one I'd been married to for over a decade, and I couldn't hold back any longer. "You're not even funny anymore, you know that?" I said, louder than I intended. Everyone turned to look at me, but I didn't care. The words were out, and they felt like a release. I looked at Mark, his face frozen in a mix of confusion and hurt. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low, but the anger was palpable. "You heard me," I replied, feeling my heart race. "You're overweight, and you're gross. It's embarrassing to be seen with you like this. You used to have a spark. Now all you do is sit around drinking beer and telling bad jokes." A hush fell over the crowd. No one spoke. No one moved. Mark's face twisted in shock, then anger. He stood up abruptly, knocking his beer over, his hands trembling. "Is that really how you feel?" he asked, his voice shaky but sharp. I didn't know what I expected, but his reaction wasn't it. He seemed to crumble in front of me, the hurt so evident on his face that for a split second, I regretted what I'd said. But the damage was done. The air around us was thick with tension as Mark turned and stormed off, his steps loud and angry. I stood frozen, surrounded by the stunned faces of our friends and family. The party, once lively and full of laughter, suddenly felt like a distant memory. And as I stood there, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air, I couldn't help but wonder, had I just ruined everything? The silence in the backyard was deafening. I stood there, frozen, my mouth dry, as the last echoes of Mark's footsteps faded into the house. The party had come to a halt, everyone still too stunned to speak. My stomach churned, and the weight of what I'd just done pressed down on me like a leaden weight. What had I just said? The words felt like they were still hanging in the air, vibrating, even though Mark was gone. I wanted to hide, to run and disappear into the nearest room, but I couldn't. I couldn't even move. My legs were stiff, as if the reality of the situation had paralyzed me. Everyone's eyes were on me now, their expressions a mix of confusion, discomfort, and shock. No one knew what to say, least of all me. It was Karen who broke the silence first. "You need to go talk to him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I shook my head, the shame eating away at me. "I don't know what to say," I muttered, barely able to form the words. My mind was racing, too fast for me to process. How could I have done that? How could I have said those things to the man I married, the man I once loved? "I don't think you fully realize what you just did," Karen continued, her gaze intense. "He's not going to just forget it, you know." I nodded, the reality sinking in. No, he wouldn't forget. Not after that. I had insulted him in front of everyone, humiliated him in a way I didn't even fully understand at the time. I had seen his face, the hurt and anger, but now, in the quiet aftermath, it was hitting me. The way I had made him feel small, unworthy, invisible. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," it was just, my words faltered as I tried to explain. But there was no easy explanation. Karen was quiet for a moment, watching me with a look of understanding mixed with disappointment. "You should go to him. Before this gets any worse." I didn't want to face him. I didn't want to confront what I had just done. But the guilt gnawed at me, and I knew she was right. He was inside, likely stewing in his hurt and anger, and I had to try to make it right. I excused myself from the small group, walking slowly toward the house. The path felt like it stretched for miles, each step heavy with the weight of the situation. I pushed open the back door, stepping into the cool interior of the house, the dim light offering no comfort. Mark was nowhere to be seen, but I could hear the faint sound of him moving around upstairs. "Mark?" I called softly, my voice trembling. There was no answer, but the sound of a door slamming shut upstairs made my heart drop. I didn't need to ask which room he was in. I took a deep breath and started up the stairs, the silence around me suffocating. When I reached our bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open cautiously, not sure what I was walking into. Mark was standing by the window, staring out into the darkened backyard. He was silent, his back to me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't turn around. His body was tense, rigid. I could feel the anger radiating off him, and it made my stomach churn. "You think that's going to fix it?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. What could I say? How could I explain the hurtful words that had just spilled out of my mouth? "I was drunk," I said finally, the words sounding weak even to my own ears. "I didn't mean it." You didn't mean it," he interrupted, spinning around to face me. His eyes were burning with frustration and hurt. "You didn't mean it, but you still said it. In front of everyone. How am I supposed to believe that?" I flinched at the accusation, but I deserved it. I had thrown a dagger at him, and now I was standing here, trying to pretend it was just an accident. I was frustrated, I continued, my voice shaking. "You don't take care of yourself anymore. You don't do anything. I try to make it work, and it just feels like I'm doing it all alone." His face twisted in disbelief. "So that's what this is about?" he asked, his voice rising. "You insult me because I've gained weight? Because I'm not perfect? Is that what you think this is? That you're some kind of prize that I'm lucky to have?" "No," I said quickly, my throat tight. "That's not what I meant. It's not just that. It's everything. The distance between us. The way you've checked out of this relationship." You think I've checked out?" He stepped toward me, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're the only one struggling here? You think I've been happy with myself? With this situation?" He gestured toward his body, his face contorted in a mix of anger and hurt. I couldn't respond. He was right. I had been so focused on my own frustrations that I hadn't stopped to think about how he might feel. How he might be struggling, too. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I was just so angry, and I lashed out. I never should have said those things." He didn't answer at first, just stood there, his breathing heavy. I could see the anger slowly fading from his face, replaced by something else, something deeper. "I don't know if I can just forget it," he said quietly, his voice full of pain. "I don't know if I can just pretend like everything's okay after you said that." "I don't want you to forget it," I replied, taking a step closer. "I don't want to pretend. I want to fix this. I want to make things right." Mark looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching, almost as if he was weighing my words. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I don't know if I can just move on from this. But I'll try. For you. For us." The words didn't fix everything, but they were a start. And for the first time in what felt like a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we weren't beyond repair. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The following week felt like an emotional roller coaster, each day dragging me deeper into the uncertainty of what was happening to my marriage. Mark had agreed to try to move past the words I had thrown at him, but there was a cold distance between us now. It wasn't as though we were strangers, but the warmth that had once defined our relationship seemed to have dimmed. Conversations were polite, but brief. Our touches, once intimate and loving, felt mechanical. I could feel the walls slowly closing in each one I built myself with my thoughtless comments. I spent hours analyzing the moment of the party, replaying every second in my mind. What had I been thinking? The words had come out so easily, like they were already there, buried deep inside me, waiting for the right moment to escape. But that wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be. I wanted to fix this, wanted things to go back to the way they had been, but the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if it was even possible. Was it possible to repair something once it had been shattered? Was there a way to rebuild trust, to restore the bond we had before my careless remark? By the time Friday arrived, I felt like I had exhausted all my options. Mark had grown more withdrawn, spending hours on his phone, barely acknowledging me unless absolutely necessary. I tried talking to him again, asking if he wanted to do something, anything, to reconnect, but he would simply shrug and mumble something about being tired. His silence was suffocating, and I couldn't help but feel it was a punishment, a reminder of how deeply I had hurt him. I decided to take a different approach. If he wouldn't talk to me, maybe I could at least show him how much I cared in the only way I knew how. I spent the entire day preparing dinner, carefully planning every detail. I knew it wasn't going to fix everything, but I hoped it might serve as a small bridge between us. I set the table with candles and soft music playing in the background, trying to create a sense of intimacy that had been lost. It was a far cry from the heated arguments and strained silences that had defined the week. When Mark came downstairs, he paused at the entrance to the kitchen. His eyes swept over the table, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of something in his expression, perhaps curiosity, or maybe it was just the exhaustion of the situation. "You cooked?" he asked, his voice low. I smiled nervously, smoothing my hands down the sides of my dress. I thought it might be nice to have dinner together. Just the two of us. He didn't answer right away, but after a few seconds, he nodded and walked over to the table. He sat down without saying much, his posture rigid. I could feel the tension still radiating off him, but I was determined to push through it. We ate in silence for a while, the only sounds in the room coming from the clink of silverware against plates. I stole glances at him, trying to gauge his mood, but his face was unreadable. I could tell he was thinking about something, his mind far away. I wondered if it was about me, about the words I had said that day at the pool party, or if it was something else entirely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said." My heart sank. I had expected this moment, but it didn't make it any easier. "I know," I said softly, unable to hide the guilt in my voice. "I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't mean it. You have to believe that." He looked up at me then, his eyes searching my face. "I don't know if I can just forget it. But I'm trying, I really am." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had hoped for some reassurance, for some kind of comfort, but instead, I felt the weight of his disappointment. He wasn't angry, not anymore, but the sadness in his voice was something I couldn't ignore. "I don't want you to forget it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I just want you to know that I regret it. I want to fix it, but I don't know how." Mark set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying me for a long moment. "I don't know if you can fix it, Mia," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can fix it either. It's not just about the words you said. It's about the way I've felt for a while now, like I'm invisible to you. Like I'm just here. But I don't really matter." I froze. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. How had it gotten this bad? I had been so focused on my own frustrations that I hadn't stopped to listen to his. I hadn't even considered how he was feeling. The realization crashed over me, and I felt a sharp pang of regret. "I never meant for you to feel like that," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't want you to feel invisible. I've been so frustrated with everything that's changed, and I let it all come out in the worst possible way. But you matter, Mark. You do." He looked at me, his gaze intense but distant. "It's not just about the words, Mia. It's about what's been happening between us for months. You've been checking out of this marriage, too." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. He was right. I had been distant, emotionally unavailable. I had buried myself in work, in social events, in anything that kept me from confronting the cracks that had formed between us. I had let our connection wither, and now I was trying to patch it up with words and dinner dates, as if that could make it all better. But nothing would fix it unless I was willing to face the truth. "I've been an idiot," I admitted, my voice small. "I've been so selfish. I don't want to lose you, Mark. I don't want this to be the end of us." Mark was silent for a long time, his eyes never leaving mine. Finally, he exhaled deeply and nodded. "I don't want it to be the end either, but it can't just go back to how it was. We need to talk, really talk. Not just about what happened at the party, but about everything." "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm for the first time that evening. "I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to fix this." And as we sat there, the weight of the past week still heavy between us, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The days after our conversation at dinner were anything but easy. Mark and I began talking more, but the discomfort lingered, like an unhealed wound we were trying to ignore. Each attempt to bridge the gap between us felt like walking on fragile glass. Any wrong word, any wrong step, could shatter everything again. I was terrified that my mistake had caused irreversible damage. That despite our efforts to fix things, we might never be able to return to how we were. We started going to therapy, hoping that a professional could help us navigate the mess I had created. I wasn't sure it would work, but I felt I had no choice. Every day I looked at Mark and saw the hurt in his eyes, the way he no longer laughed as easily, the way he didn't seem to trust me the way he once had. It was like I was living with a stranger who knew me too well. The sessions were intense. We talked about everything, about my words, my actions, and, more importantly, about the things we hadn't been saying for months. Mark opened up about how he had felt invisible to me for so long. How I had been emotionally absent, so focused on my own frustrations and discontent that I had failed to notice him slipping away. I had no idea how deep the cracks had gone, how distant we had become, and how much my neglect had affected him. It was painful, hearing all the things I had ignored. I didn't want to hear it. But I knew I had to. Mark needed me to listen, and I was determined to show him that I could change. I promised him that I would try to be a better wife, that I would work on being present, on acknowledging his feelings, on making him feel like he mattered. I had no idea if it would be enough, but I was willing to do whatever it took. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories and setbacks. Mark was still distant, still guarded, but there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when I could see a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with. We laughed again, not as much as we had before, but it was there. Slowly, things began to shift. I started being more attentive to his needs, to our relationship. I made time for us, even if it meant sacrificing my own plans. We spent quiet evenings at home, talking about everything and nothing, trying to rebuild what I had torn apart. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner for the two of us. Mark had just come home from work, his tie loosened, his shoulders tense as he entered the room. I knew he was still carrying the weight of everything that had happened, still uncertain about whether he could forgive me fully. But today, there was something different in his eyes, a softness, a hint of the warmth that had once been there. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking the silence. "About us. About what we've been through." I turned, my heart racing. His tone was calm, but there was an intensity in his words that made me nervous. "What about us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think we've made a lot of progress," he replied slowly, choosing his words carefully. I think I'm starting to believe that we can get through this. That we can fix what's broken." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to burst into tears, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. But another part of me was scared. Scared that we weren't really as close as we thought, that the cracks were still there, hiding beneath the surface. "I'm so sorry for what I did, Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "For everything. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't realize how much I was pulling away." He reached out, placing a hand gently on my arm. "I know," he said quietly. "And I know that you're trying. I see it, Mia. I really do. I don't think it's going to be easy, and I don't know if things will ever go back to the way they were, but I think we're getting there." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "Do you think we can fix this?" I asked, my voice breaking. He smiled softly, a small, bittersweet smile. "I think we can try." The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long seemed to lift, if only for a moment. There was still a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe we were heading in the right direction. Later that evening, after dinner, Mark and I sat on the couch together, the TV playing softly in the background. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, and I allowed myself to savor it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that we were trying, both of us. We were fighting for each other, for our marriage, and for the life we had built together. And in that moment, as I sat next to him, I realized that sometimes love wasn't about perfect moments or flawless relationships. It was about the willingness to face the mistakes, to apologize, and to do the hard work of rebuilding. It was about the small, everyday efforts that showed someone you cared even when things were broken. I didn't know if we were out of the woods yet, but I believed that as long as we kept trying, we could make it. Because love, after all, wasn't about perfection, it was about growth, forgiveness, and understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to heal us. As I leaned my head on Mark's shoulder, I realized that while things might never be exactly the same as they had been before, they didn't need to be. We were moving forward, step by step, and that was all that mattered. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future.